Welcome. I'm really glad you're joining us for today's deep dive. Start things off, I'm going to ask you to temporarily just forget the standard metrics you might normally associate with weight loss.
Yeah, completely toss out the BMI charts.
Exactly. Set aside the number on the scale, and let's even pause on the standard medical definition of obesity for a minute. We are looking at a 2026 concept paper today that really challenges what we assume about fat storage.
It definitely flips the script.
It's titled Organ Vitality Mechanobiologic Activation, authored by Dr. Lev Nemotin. And you might have actually seen this making the rounds on the Uncompressed Thinking channel recently.
Right, it's been getting a lot of attention there, for good reason.
So our mission today is to explore Dr. Nemotin's his rather fascinating hypothesis. The core idea is pairing intermittent resistance exercise with targeted physical belly massage to literally squeeze the toxic fat out of your internal organs.
Which sounds intense when you say it like that.
It does. But by the end of this deep dive, our goal is to equip you with a completely new organ-centric understanding of your own metabolic health. Okay, let's unpack this. We typically view body fat as just passive insulation, right? Something we just need to burn off.
Yeah, like dead weight. Just run on the treadmill until the total mass drops.
Exactly. But this paper shifts that perspective entirely. It argues that the critical variable isn't necessarily your total body mass, but the specific biological neighborhood where that fat lives.
Because the location changes the biology entirely. To understand why this paper proposes such a targeted intervention, we have to isolate the specific dangers of ectopic fat.
And that's the fat stored directly inside the organs, right?
Right, inside organs like the liver and pancreas.
Yeah.
And also paravisceral fat, which is the fat physically surrounding those organs. This isn't just inert storage tissue.
It's actually doing something.
Very much so. This visceral and ectopic fat is highly biologically active. It's constantly draining free fatty acids and inflammatory signals directly into the portal circulation.
The portal circulation.
Yeah, you can visualize the portal circulation as a high-volume, direct-access vascular highway that feeds straight into your liver.
So rather than just, sitting idly under the skin on your thighs or arms, this specific belly fat is actively pumping inflammatory mediators directly into the body's primary metabolic processing plant.
What's fascinating here is how a relatively microscopic amount of this specific visceral fat can punch significantly above its weight class in terms of cardiometabolic risk.
Meaning you don't need a lot of it to cause huge problems.
Exactly. You don't need a massive accumulation of ectopic fat to start driving severe hepatic insulin resistance or systemic low-grade inflammation. This localized toxic signaling pushes a patient toward inflammatory liver disease, diabetes, and cardiovascular events.
And that's completely independent of their overall subcutaneous fat levels.
Right. Totally independent of what the scale might say on a given morning.
That specific disconnect explains why you might know someone who appears quite lean externally, yet their doctor is flagging severe metabolic issues on their blood panels.
The whole thin on the outside, fat on the inside concept.
Exactly. It also illuminates why standard dietary interventions can feel so frustrating. You might be successfully lowering your total body weight, but if you aren't improving the actual functional capacity of these organs by clearing out that ectopic fat,
The underlying metabolic engine is still totally compromised.
right. Which brings us to Dr. Nemotin's proposed intervention. He calls it the exercise massage exercise cycle, or the mechanobiologic synergy protocol.
It's quite a structured routine.
It is. You begin with a block of 2 to 4 minutes of resistance exercise, and then immediately upon finishing that set, you transition into 60 to 120 seconds of targeted abdominal mechanical stimulation.
Essentially localized vibration and rhythmic compression.
Right. And you repeat that sequence for 3 to 5 full cycles.
Now, transitioning directly from lifting weights into a localized belly massage might sound totally counterintuitive at first.
It sounds a bit like a gimmick, to be honest.
It really does. But the paper establishes a robust physiological rationale. It breaks it down into 4 interacting mechanisms. The first is the systemic context.
Okay, lay that out for us.
The resistance exercise forces an environment of high energy demand. You are aggressively spiking catecholamines and creating a hormonal landscape that heavily favors lipolysis.
Basically, the adrenaline is pumping and the body is ready to burn fat.
Right. Skeletal muscle glucose uptake increases, and you are essentially priming the entire systemic environment for metabolic turnover.
But that systemic priming is only half the equation here, because once the system is running hot, the protocol leverages the second mechanism, which is local perfusion.
The blood flow.
Right. By applying rhythmic compression and vibration directly to the abdomen, you forcefully augment local blood flow and microvascular exchange.
You're driving circulation into both the superficial layers and the deeper visceral tissues right when that systemic adrenaline is at its absolute peak.
And that increased perfusion pairs perfectly with the third mechanism, right? The interstitial and lymphatic dynamics.
Exactly. The mechanical stimulation physically assists in the turnover of interstitial fluid. By enhancing the lymphatic transport of these fluids, you're actively facilitating the clearance of inflammatory mediators and metabolic byproducts.
So you're basically helping the local environment flush out the biological exhaust.
That's a great way to put it. It supports tissue homeostasis and recovery in that highly sensitive midsection.
Now, the fourth mechanism is where the paper really shifts things for me. It focuses on mechanotransduction. This concept completely reframed how I view fat tissue. Can you walk through how that works?
It's a remarkable area of cellular biology. Mechanotransduction is simply the process by which cells sense physical mechanical stimuli and translate them into biochemical signals.
So the cells can actually feel being pushed and pulled.
Yes, we now understand that adipose cells and the crucial stromal cells surrounding them are acutely aware of their physical environment. They detect mechanical loading.
Like stretch, shear stress, or pressure.
Right. And when they feel that, they respond by altering their chemical signaling pathways. This applied physical force can actively modulate their inflammatory cytokine output, influence their insulin sensitivity, and even dictate how the fat tissue remodels itself over time.
You're essentially using physical force to type a different set of instructions into the tissue.
Precisely.
I do want to clarify a visual from the text here, though, because the word massage and fat together can conjure up the wrong image. The author explicitly notes that this protocol is not about physically popping or fragmenting the fat cells.
You aren't popping them like biological bubble wrap.
Yeah, we aren't destroying the cellular structure.
Yeah.
The hypothesis is that this specific mechanical stimulation shifts the localized fat tissue from a lazy inflammatory storage state into a highly dynamic, metabolically active state.
You are fundamentally changing the metabolic environment and signaling behavior, not trying to mechanically obliterate the cells themselves.
Okay, let's map out exactly where this physical interaction takes place. The paper includes a detailed anatomical map, Figure 1, which overlays the target zones on the human abdomen. I want to walk you through these 4 zones so you can conceptualize this on your own body.
They're prioritized based on the severity, the metabolic consequences of the fat in each area.
And the absolute primary target, the real MVP of the whole intervention, is the liver.
Definitely. The liver acts as your central metabolic regulator. It governs systemic glucose output, manages lipid export, specifically your VLDL, and plays a massive role in systemic inflammatory signaling.
And when excess fat gets trapped inside there?
Hepatic steatosis. That links directly to hepatic insulin resistance and dyslipidemia. Left unchecked, it frequently progresses to MASH, which is a severe inflammatory liver disease.
So to target this, the anatomical focus is the upper right quadrant of the abdomen, tucked just below the rib cage.
Though the text provides a very strong caution here, you have to avoid applying direct downward pressure over the actual ribs to prevent musculoskeletal pain.
Right. The technique involves rhythmic compression and microvibration specifically over that right upper quadrant soft tissue. The author also attaches a very specific clinical threshold to this target, achieving a 30% or greater relative reduction in MRI-PDFF. How does that imaging metric translate to clinical success?
So MRI-PDFF is the gold standard non-invasive imaging scan used in clinical trials to precisely quantify the percentage of fat inside the liver tissue.
It actually maps the fat versus water content.
Exactly. Reaching a 30% reduction in that specific metric is the widely accepted threshold for showing a genuine, meaningful healing response. It indicates the inflammation is subsiding.
And by aggressively targeting this hepatic zone, the clinical expectation is a restoration of insulin sensitivity, right?
Lowered fasting glucose, a massive drop in circulating triglycerides, and effectively interrupting the pathway that leads to type 2 diabetes.
Amazing. Target 2 shifts our focus to the pancreas. The map places this in the upper central abdomen, the epigastrium. But there's a prominent warning here to really modulate the intensity.
You have to be gentle.
Why is that? And why does the pancreas warrant its own dedicated phase?
Well, it's near the stomach and major vascular structures like the aorta, so you demand gentle to moderate pressure. As for why it's a target, Ectopic fat in the pancreas is profoundly destructive to beta cell function.
And those are the cells making our insulin.
Right. When peripancreatic fat starts to suffocate the organ, those beta cells experience lipotoxicity and they fail. Once your ability to secrete insulin is compromised, glycemic control goes out the window.
So by applying gentle rhythmic mechanical stimulation to this upper central region,
Always prioritizing physical comfort over deep pressure.
the hypothesis suggests you can help clear that localized fat and save those beta cells. Stabilizing that function is just critical for halting the progression from prediabetes into full-blown type 2 diabetes.
Absolutely.
Target 3 moves us lower into the mid-abdomen. This zone targets the visceral or mesenteric fat depot. Now, obviously, you can't physically reach in and massage the deep fat wrapping around your intestines.
No, definitely not.
But the paper argues that applying broad regional mechanical stimulation across the front of the belly still exerts a powerful influence on the localized vascular network feeding that area.
Modulating that specific depot is vital because visceral fat is the primary source of that portal link inflammatory signaling we talked about earlier.
Pumping the toxic exhaust to the liver.
Right. The objective with this broad mid-abdominal stimulation is to actively turn down the output of inflammatory cytokines that cause atherosclerosis, while simultaneously cutting the volume of free fatty acids being dumped into the portal vein.
You're trying to quiet down the chronic low-grade inflammation that defines metabolic syndrome.
Exactly.
Finally, we reach target 4, the kidneys. This requires shifting the stimulation to the flanks and the lower posterior lateral abdomen, basically your sides and lower back.
The kidneys present a unique challenge. They're retroperitoneal, meaning they sit much deeper in the abdominal cavity and are harder to reach with external force.
But targeting them is important because fat around the kidneys is strongly associated with high blood pressure and chronic kidney disease risk.
Yes, partly due to the actual physical mechanical compression that the fat exerts on the delicate kidney structures. The protocol advises applying light pressure over a broad surface area in the flanks, strictly avoiding any aggressive force over the spine or the floating ribs.
The benefits here are more indirect, right?
Right, focusing on better systemic blood pressure regulation and alleviating the physical stress placed on the renal system.
Okay, so now that we have the anatomical map and the core concept of mixing resistance training with targeted massage, we run into a pretty huge logistical hurdle.
The transition.
Yeah. How are you supposed to execute a seamless transition from a heavy set of squats or push-ups to applying precise vibration to your liver in a matter of seconds? If you have to rack your weights, get down on a mat, and grab a motorized massage gun, you're going to lose that highly primed metabolic window.
The paper anticipates that exact friction. For this mechanobiologic synergy to work, the cycle between systemic stress and local stimulation has to be rapid and uninterrupted. So, to bridge that gap, Dr. Nemotin introduces the isotone platform.
The mechanical design of this tool is really quite brilliant. The paper outlines a single handheld device constructed with 2 spherical handles connected by a central cylindrical resistance element. It's built entirely around a dual-use concept.
So in exercise mode, you grip it and perform push-pull movements to generate bidirectional resistance. This creates the systemic metabolic activation.
And then, without ever putting the tool down, you instantly transition your grip into stimulation mode.
The geometry is key. You can use the spherical ball handles for what the paper calls pinpoint stimulation.
Like on the right upper quadrant for the liver.
Right. Or you can use the broad cylindrical middle section for regional stimulation, rolling it across the mid-abdomen to disperse the load over that larger visceral fat depot. Because it stays in your hands the whole time, the transition time is practically zero.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The paper geeks out over a specific frequency required for this mechanotransduction to be optimal. They advocate for a rhythm of about 5 hertz.
5 oscillations per second.
Yeah. And they aren't suggesting a high-velocity motorized percussion gun. They specifically recommend a manually generated frequency.
The manual aspect is a huge nuance here. 5 hertz is a rhythm that falls perfectly within human manual control. By naturally oscillating your hands, you create a low-amplitude mechanical signal that responds to your own biofeedback.
It hits the sweet spot to maintain local blood flow and keep the metabolic window open.
Furthermore, a manual tool requires you to remain neurologically engaged. You adjust the intensity dynamically just by changing your leverage. It avoids the potentially dangerous, unyielding force of a heavy motorized device.
It's a really compelling synthesis of mechanics and biology, but as with any emerging medical hypothesis, we have to look critically at the practical realities. The paper doesn't shy away from the limitations.
No, we must maintain an objective view here. The author is explicitly clear that this protocol is an adjunct therapy. It's not a magic replacement for physical exercise and a negative energy balance.
Right, you cannot out-massage a diet built on hyper-processed foods.
Nor can you vibrate away the need for actual cardiovascular exertion. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this approach supports adherence to an exercise program by making recovery and body awareness better.
But it still requires a clinical pilot study to prove the exact imaging-based benefits.
Exactly. They need to track hard clinical endpoints like ALT and AST liver enzymes, HbA1c for long-term blood sugar, and that MRI-PDFF to prove the organs are actually functioning better at a cellular level.
And they establish uncompromising safety boundaries. I want to run through those vital contraindications really quickly so you have the full picture.
Please do.
The paper states unequivocally that this should be avoided if you're pregnant, if you've had recent abdominal surgery, or if you have active GI bleeds or unexplained pain. And it should always feel therapeutic and deep, but never painful.
There's also a brilliant physiological safeguard built in regarding respiration. The protocol explicitly dictates nasal breathing during the massage phase.
Which triggers a parasympathetic rebound.
Exactly. By forcing slow nasal inhales, you actively shift your nervous system out of the fight-or-flight state from the exercise back into a rest and digest state. It makes the intervention much more tolerable.
Synthesizing everything we've covered today, the ultimate takeaway here is the adoption of a completely new mindset. It's about viewing your health through an organ-centric lens.
Not just chasing an aesthetic in the mirror.
Right. It's about optimizing the vitality of the liver and pancreas using the combination of systemic exercise and localized mechanobiology. So what does this all mean? It means your fat cells aren't just passive storage. They are active, feeling entities that respond to physical touch and movement.
Which leaves us with a highly provocative thought to consider regarding our everyday lives. If we accept that our fat and stromal cells are constantly listening to mechanical pressure via mechanotransduction, changing their inflammatory signals based on physical force, how are our daily passive physical habits influencing our organs?
Wow, that's a great point.
Think about the restrictive tightness of the belts we wear for 12 hours a day, or the compressed, hunched posture we maintain while sitting at a desk all day long. How might those constant, unintentional physical pressures be secretly communicating with our deep abdominal organs? Are we inadvertently broadcasting the exact wrong mechanical signals, chronically triggering inflammatory pathways without ever realizing it?
That is an incredible thought to end on. If 2 minutes of intentional pressure can heal tissue, what is 10 uninterrupted hours of unintentional compression doing to our baseline? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the world around you, keep challenging your assumptions, and we'll see you next time.